it. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Paths Uncovered, the podcast where we get to go through untraditional pathways within and inside of technology, within and inside, into and within technology. I don't know words anymore, but we're here, we're diving in. Today's guest I've got with me, Larene and Gassick. The two of us, I actually could not for the life of me sitting here remember how we possibly crossed paths, and I think it was just Twitter, and then we just ended up like helping out with like meetups here and there, but I'm very excited to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Do you want to do a very quick introduction to yourself and what you do and what you're about? That'd be great.
Okay, no worries. My name is Larene, and I am currently a consultant lead product engineer. I've been working for myself for a couple of years, kind of on and off now, and I specialise in accessibility. So that is what I do for work, and what I do for fun is I am also a co-organiser of a meetup group called Tech Leading Ladies, which is a group supporting women into and helping bridge the gap in gender diversity and leadership positions in tech. And I have two lovely co-founders as well.
I love that. And I think a really big part of where I really wanted you to come onto this was because I don't think I'd had anyone that was like freelancing or working for themselves on the podcast at all. And I was like, it's such an interesting pathway. And I'm like, I think it's one of those like really fearful ones where I'm like, oh my God, the fear of like not having the job stability or like something backing me up freaks me out sometimes when I talk to other people too. So I'm like very excited to hear how we got to everything. So let's dive in. We dive in usually all the way back into kind of high school, like times of like college. What was the plans? What were the original thoughts of like, this is what I want to do?
That's a really good question, which is probably what everyone else says after you get started with high school. So I went to high school in a small town called Harvey Bay. That's about 3.5 hours drive north of Brisbane, Australia, and nothing too different to probably a lot of other people's kind of general high school experience, all the teenage angst and all the trying to work out who you are and what you want to do, and I kind of didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was very lucky. My parents spent a lot of time kind of trying to push me towards making a decision. And I remember this moment that I had to pick what I wanted to do at university, and we went to the newsagent and bought, I don't know if you know of the Good Guides book, this like really thick book, actually made of paper, and it had listed every single university course, what do you need to get in, and a bit of information about what is involved in the course and kind of career prospects afterwards. And I had always been kind of interested in computers and stuff. So my father is visually impaired. He's fully blind now, but while I was growing up he was losing his vision over time, and so I spent a lot of time, because he was an engineer, an electrical engineer, kind of spent a lot of time helping him with his stuff and helping him to learn how to use a computer as he was losing his vision, and the tools involved like a screen reader and things in that. So I was kind of always around technology. So I would also help him solder circuit boards and things like that. So that was probably what played a big part in my decision. So I opened up this book and had no idea what I wanted to do, and basically just found the coolest sounding degree, which was mechatronic engineering. I had no idea what any of those words meant.
Honestly, it does sound like the coolest thing I've ever heard. It also just kind of weirdly reminds me of like Power Rangers for some reason.
Exactly. I was fully into anime at the time, so I was like, this sounds like Transformers, this is good to be good. So it was sort of related. It was a mix of mechanical, electrical and computer engineering, and so it was robotics kind of oriented, which was cool. That's a lie, actually. I wanted to be an artist, but my parents wouldn't let me, so I had to put that one down. So I had to pick something. I wanted to be an animator. I wanted to work like for Pixar or Disney or something.
Oh my god,
because I spent a lot of time drawing.
That's actually so interesting to me. Number one, because Julia Gent, who was on probably the week before this, the last episode before this one, it was exactly the same. She was super into cards. Her whole family's into arts, but also she's just like, her parents are like, no, Julia, we've had enough.
Don't do it.
Get a degree, get a proper degree, like get a job prospects. And then the other thing
Would
you
just
like
mentioned, to make money?
Exactly, the money part. She's like, how are you going to pay bills? But then the other thing you just mentioned about Disney or Pixar, sorry, this is such a tangent, but like I was watching something on Disney Plus. I think it was about how they created the rides at Disneyland, like how they actually came up with the ideas and stuff behind it. Very cool show, like such an interesting thing, especially if you've been to some of them and you're like, oh, that's the like history behind
it's so
it.
cool. It's like Imagineering.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I'm like, I'm sorry. If I ever knew as a child that that's what I would have been called as a profession, that I was a Disney Imagineer, right, there would have been no other pathway. Like, that's all I would be doing. Like, it just sounds so cool. Which is where, like, you mentioned the whole, like, you wanted to work with Disney and Pixar. I'm like, it makes sense.
They're pretty cool companies, not gonna lie. Probably still would like to work for them if I could.
If I can call myself an Imagineer, I'm in. Sorry, that was a very good tangent, but you're in college, you've just selected the degree you want. Well, other way wanted other than Pixar, but yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I got into engineering and with a whole bunch of friends from my high school as well. We all decided to do engineering together. And so I went to university in Brisbane, the University of Queensland. So we all moved out of home and kind of rented in share houses or stayed in colleges together. So it was really, really nice to kind of have that traveling group. These are all like, and yeah, so it was quite a while ago. So the group was mainly made of, I think I was the only woman. The group was like all these dudes that I used to play video games with. So it was nice to kind of have that starting group, but it was a reflection of, I guess, the diversity of that, like STEM and engineering and computer science at the time.
Yeah.
And it didn't get much better while I was going through uni. So I think our graduating class was maybe 30 or 40 people, and I think by the end of it, there were maybe 2 or 3 women left. So, and there weren't that many to start with either. So yeah, it was a bit of a kind of a, I guess, early story in that kind of flows all the way through my journey in terms of getting involved in diversity and women who code and things that I will talk about later.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. I think we had something similar. Like, I think it's changed a little bit. So when I started college, there was 1 in 5, I think. So it was like 12 out of the 60 in our year. So we did maths, like when we started, it was like straight out just a maths degree. And there was more girls in our year of first year than there was in the 3 years combined. Like the other, I was like, oh, okay. So like if we're going to things like maths ball or things like that, like we would joke about how it's like, oh, like do people wear like long dresses or short? And we're like, we're the majority. We can make up our mind. Like whatever we do, it'll work.
We set the trends here.
But in fairness, like I think the year after year, kind of following along to us, the numbers were steadily increasing. So I think we were consistently getting smaller and smaller majority, which is great to hear. We're like, yes, even better, like younger ones coming through. But like, I think I fully understand that. Definitely not at the level you probably went through, where at least there's a good level of us around. There's a good group of us around that are still friends. But yeah, God, I don't know how that all went. So like, yeah, actually, do talk to me about that. How did that all go? Like, how was the 3 years of engineering?
Oh, funny. I spent 7 years, so
I thought 4
I
was
just
torture.
couldn't leave. I know. So I did I thought it was a good idea at the time, but I went, all right. So I still have like, I don't think I'm that interested in engineering, or I would kind of keep myself motivated by doing a dual degree with arts, where I can like pick whatever I want. And so I I started off with doing a double degree, which was only meant to take 5.5. So I took my time. I just couldn't leave, um, and that plan didn't work out so well because my friends kind of uh, sped ahead in the degree because they were doing a single degree. Some of them were doing a double degree as well, a single degree. And so all the help that I wanted for like assignments and stuff and working with people I knew in class, all those plans fell through. So I kind of regretted doing a double degree because I didn't kind of have that cohort to go through with.
Yeah.
Though I did kind of at the end kind of pack all my engineering stuff together and then do my arts afterwards because I realised that was happening. I'm like, I want friends to kind of work on assignments with. Luckily, some of them would have done the course like a year before and would help me with assignments and stuff. But that was one of the big parts of my experience, and I think it was tough. I think I was always kind of a pretty high performer at high school. I got an OP1, which translates to, I think, the ATAR 99, 98. I'm not sure what the translation is now, but so I was so studious in high school and studied but when I got to uni, and this links to I think Linda MacGyver, who you just interviewed.
Yeah.
Dr. Linda's books of like how broken the education system was in high school. So I realized not very long ago actually that school teaches you how to pass tests. Doesn't actually teach you how to be very good at problem solving or like thinking outside the box or like asking good questions and questioning things. So highly recommend reading Raising Heretics. I'm sure you've already spruiked the heck out of it. Life-changing book. So I realized that once I got to uni and I had to kind of while it's not too much better than high school, that you did have to kind of learn things that were applying to real life and kind of think for yourself, and a lot of problem solving as well. And still studying to how to pass tests. So I didn't do so great at uni. I started off pretty strong in the kind of first year courses where it's a lot of preliminary stuff. It's memorization. You sit the exam, you pass the exam, you move on. And then I don't know about you, Akanksha, in those kind of courses where you memorize stuff for the exam, you completely forget it for the rest of your life.
I'm like listening to this and I'm like, exactly the same experience. I think it goes to a lot of people who end up doing STEM because they've obviously done fairly well in those subjects in high school, right? Which is just so different to what it actually is. And especially for something like maths, where maths is like actual numbers in the school and you're like, oh yes, this makes sense. There's no numbers in college. Everything's just abstracted. And I'm like, what have I done? Like, what is this?
It's like, was I smart? Am I?
Oh, the absolute like syndromes that go through, and that was the thing, right? Where because I'm sure it was kind of similar as well for you, where like the degree that I ended up going into, it was such a like the cutoff was so high, like to get into it, like it was all very much everyone was the big fish in their ponds before they came in, and now it's just like, I am such a tiny fish in this pond. What the hell have I done? I mean, there was people who won like the gold medals and stuff for every single subject in like our Leaving Cert Year 12 exams, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I thought I was good. This was such a lie. What have I done with my whole life? Like, what do we do now? I fully exactly the same.
Yeah. And I got to uni and I like took so long because I couldn't even count credits properly. I did the wrong number of credits and couldn't graduate. It's like, what am I doing here? How did I get this far in life? Anyway, I really struggled through the subjects that had like real life problems and like and I guess real skills in the engineering side of things is just like, oh my goodness, this is hard. This is really hard. I can't just memorize it and then move on, because the next course assumes you know all that stuff, and then you gotta. So you actually have to understand it. I think anyway. I managed to pass, but like. High school me would have been so disappointed with the grades that university me got. Yeah. But by the time I was like drinking and partying, I didn't really care that much anyway. So yeah, and you realize once you get to the workplace that none of that matters. Nobody cares.
It's
I guess weird... like applying for a job, but
yeah, but like it is so weird, isn't it? Like, as in, it didn't matter. There's definitely people who were like, it doesn't matter what you end up doing, like, it's fine, you're doing an undergrad, like, the whole degree is about figuring yourself out, like, there's nothing, no one cares about what you actually learn. And I mean, the amount of people that told me that, and people not in college told me this, like, these are people who have gone out and experienced this in first-hand real life, and yet it was not something I could ever believe, where it really, like, the degree mattered so much, in that, like, I kept struggling. I kept not doing the best. My high school self was extremely disappointed. Like, and do you know what you said about, like, the fact that you want, like, the people around you helping? Like, we say that all the time as well about our degree. We're like, that piece of paper is not like an individual achievement. It was like a group effort to get that degree. Like, all together. It's just so interesting. And now I see it and I'm like, oh, it really, really does not matter. And my sister, who's now in college, in that process, and I'm like, actually, it doesn't matter. Cannot believe it either.
Yeah,
because it's just such a big thing when you're in it. Like, it's just impossible to think that. Like, you're like, of course it matters.
Yeah, so yeah, I really wish that I was able to get into the headspace to actually understand what I was learning in, and kind of explore it a bit more and have a bit more fun with it and play around with it rather than just focus on the exams. But at least I know what to Google now sometimes.
Yep.
But I really enjoyed it. It was a really great degree. Really, really cool. So that is kind of the summary of my university experience. At the same time, I found my love for teaching and tutoring because I didn't have a whole lot of money. Had to pay rent, and so I tried Subway for a little while, making sandwiches. So I got to become an artist.
I was gonna say, because they're called Subway artist, like sandwich artist.
Sandwich artist. So my dreams came true for a small while, not quite, and got sick of that, and then found this amazing thing called tutoring. Which I guess I was lucky that I was able to do quite well in the first year subjects, so that I could, because they have like a minimum grade level to be able to tutor for subjects. So like it it shouldn't matter at all. Like, good teaching is hard to find. Yep. And so I managed to be accepted to tutor some of the first year maths and engineering courses, and then I kept kind of even the courses that I did terribly, and I managed to get the gig tutoring because I had past experience tutoring other courses, and I enjoyed that so much, and it plays a big part in kind of the parts of tech that I love today, but yeah, so that was a big part of my life as well. It was teaching maths and teaching programming and teaching. I think those were the two main ones, and a little bit of kind of electrical engineering as well. That I really, really enjoyed and paid so well, but marking was terrible. I hated marking so much. We all hated marking so much. So, and the reason why I mentioned tutoring is because after I finished university, again, I had no idea what to do with my life. So I kind of hung around like a bad smell at UQ. At this point, I'd gotten a bunch of tutoring experience. I was lead tutor for a few subjects. I had a really, really awesome maths professor that I've tutored with a lot since I first started tutoring. And she asked me if I could help to convert. So, sorry, I'll backtrack a little bit. Have you heard of MATLAB? I'm guessing you
Yes.
have.
I mean, yes. So it's, yeah, very much an
But
industry thing, or not industry thing, sorry, just a very college academic thing more so than industry, but yeah.
Yeah, super expensive. So yeah, for your listeners, MATLAB is a very expensive version of kind of R. MATLAB was quite widely used in engineering and was really useful for kind of designing systems and testing electrical and mechanical systems. It was awful to use, but it had a lot of good plugins that were really handy. And it had its own programming language. And would you believe that MATLAB is one of the few that starts indexes from 1 and not 0? Which, yeah, I don't know.
It just makes no sense. I mean, I feel like that's one of the only things I do remember from that one module we had to use it in college. I was like, no.
Yeah, I think the reason for it, if I remember, is because it works around matrices, and in math, I think if you have a matrix, you index from 1 when you refer to elements in a matrix. That's the square grid of numbers that were really painful to do on paper. Matrix mathematics is... that's why we have computers, right? So
it's like memories unlocked that I never needed again, but yes.
Exactly. And so I was in love with MATLAB, and I was in love with the language, and people were like, what is wrong with you? But I really, really enjoyed teaching MATLAB, and so after I finished my degree, I stayed on tutoring and working as a lead tutor for MATLAB, which was teaching programming, and the maths professor asked me and another guy to turn the MATLAB tutorials, which were originally on paper, so programming, printed out on paper.
Yep.
You type it into MATLAB, get the output, write the output and your code onto the paper by hand, and then hand it into the tutor. I mean, it was a while ago. This was like, when was this? It was like 2012, 2013. So the professor asked if me and this other good dude could turn this paper tutorial into an online quiz, which made so much sense. And it's funny that it became kind of like the analogy of when I moved into consulting at my first job, that it's about helping companies move away from paper and into the digital space, right? And that's what a lot of companies have been doing over the last couple of decades. And that was my kind of taster. I had never had a good feeling about programming. I absolutely hated it during university. Like, Python was the first language I did, and like the Python works with whitespace, like indentations and stuff, and I just completely it was a nightmare to work with. I kept getting it wrong. I tried to make a tic-tac-toe game. Like, I kept stuffing it up. I kept getting the white space wrong. And I'm like, I hate this so much. I never want to be a software engineer. This is the worst. So I had a bad taste for programming in my mouth because I wasn't doing it wasn't doing it for anything that was actually useful to people. And in making this quiz online, it was actually something that was useful to someone, and me and this other guy wrote it in PHP, based off an existing system that they already had. I'm pretty sure we probably left security holes in it where students could change their grade if they wanted to, if they could work out how to like get into the app and change their grades, because it wrote directly to their grades.
I mean, if they can do that, I feel like they deserve the grade they've put themselves into. I'm like, fair play. Like,
right?
You've done enough. Like, that's grand.
And I just really, really enjoyed that. I was frustrated and it was awful. And it was really, really painful because I was like learning how to make proper apps at the same time as like past Hello World apps, like at the same time as like learning a new language and trying to teach as well. So, but I had fun with it. We put in a whole bunch of Easter eggs. There was like dinosaurs that would pop up depending on if you got the right answer. There was the Konami code. It was in there somewhere. and little in-jokes between tutors as well. Put those ones in there. I think there was like a sheep with a ponytail. I don't know. It got really random at some point. And that was my taste to kind of software engineering and building web apps. I built websites before when I was a teenager, in like MySpace and not MySpace, sorry, GeoCities.
Yep.
Was kind of while GeoCities was around. Made like a really really crappy website and and then was done with that. And then MySpace came and learned a bunch of CSS for that, and then kind of stopped there. Didn't really touch it after that. So 7 years later, I'm back into web dev again accidentally, and didn't use anything from my actual degree for a long time. So yeah, that I spent a year doing that after university, trying to work out what I wanted to do. Kind of hung out with folks that I had gone through uni with. They were doing random things. Some of them actually found jobs in robotics. They had to leave the country because there was not many jobs in robotics in the country unless you wanted to go to the mines. And a lot of them got into software and all doing kind of similar things, trying to work out what they wanted to do. I had the amazing opportunity to, I got a scholarship to go visit Silicon Valley for 10 days with a, the thing was called Startup Catalyst, and it was created by Steve Baxter. Don't know if you know, he was on Shark Tank. He's like an entrepreneur. I think he basically installed the
I'm not going to lie. I'm 99% sure someone else from Brisbane who's been on the podcast has done this exact same thing.
Oh, really?
I was like, why does it sound so familiar? Pretty sure, like, because I know she said she went to Silicon Valley and there's something along those lines of like, the names sound very familiar. So I'm like, I'm going to have to go back and check to make sure if it was or wasn't, but very familiar, yes.
Yeah. That's so funny. Such a small world, isn't it?
Very small, especially in tech. I'm like, this makes sense.
Yeah. So the gist of it was we went over to Silicon Valley, and the point of the tour was so that we didn't leave Australia for Silicon Valley, because we thought it was like this like magical godly place that we put it on a pedestal. Like you had to go to Silicon Valley to kind of make it in startups and in tech. And I think it largely achieved its goal. I mean, I stayed in Brisbane. I stayed in Australia, but I also kind of moved away from startups completely. So, but I was entertaining the idea at the time, and was kind of building like a little robot to teach programming for kids with a friend in uni. And then I think his dad wanted to sponsor us, and we were like, I was like, oh, people want to give us real money. Nope.
Too real,
I'm
too
not ready for this. And I was a little bit in it over my head at the time as well. As I said, like, I didn't do very well at uni. I didn't remember a whole lot of the electronic side of things. It was really hard. So I was really struggling with that, kind of dealing with that imposter syndrome at the same time. It's not even imposter syndrome. It was just facts. Like I didn't study that well for it. So I was like trying to build this electronics thing and going, I don't actually know what I'm doing. I have to keep doing it really slowly. I'll work it out eventually, but I would have to do it very slowly and Google a bunch of things that I completely forgotten because I didn't bother to understand it properly. So after that, I joined a company called ThoughtWorks, which is a global consultancy that specializes in helping companies make software.
So that's where the consulting bit come in. So like, oh my god, yeah, jeez. So especially because the degree is just so much in there that it was like there's so much happening that it makes sense. It's like, oh lord, a whole new sector of like section of my life. God, words are really hard today, apparently.
They are.
But yes, so consulting's happening, and this is kind of all after everything. So you're kind of done with UQ, like the university part. Are we fully done with? Like you finally walked away.
Yeah. Yes, actually, and I was doing kind of casual work teaching kids. Oh, now that I remember, gosh, this probably happens a lot.
It's such a thing where like people will forget very quickly of like what they've done and what they haven't done. It is very interesting.
Yeah. It probably wasn't in that gap year, but in the kind of last few years through uni, I was like teaching kids programming after school because I really enjoyed tutoring. And I was also working in a research lab casually with a professor of mine, again, a different one. He started his own research lab. It was really cool. And I had no idea, like, this is like kind of the introduction into the professional world, right? I had no idea like what the etiquette was. I was just kind of like fumbling around, and they were really nice to me, and they were like, oh, just come in and like do your thing. And so there were a few of these things kind of going on in the background as well, and then that kind of all led up to finding finding the job at ThoughtWorks, and that all had to come to an end because that was a full-time job. Consulting. So I joined ThoughtWorks as a grad, and my programming skills were still not great, but they didn't care about that. The ThoughtWorks grad program was about, well, you had to have some experience, and luckily I had some kind of real world experience in terms of programming, rather than university level experience. And so they had an awesome grad program. They sent us overseas to meet up with other grads from around the world for 5 weeks, and kind of trained us to consult, trained us to write software, and it was really, really awesome. They taught us, they couldn't teach us all of this in 5 weeks, but they exposed us to like how to give talks, how to give presentations, how to pair program, and then ran us through a fake app, a fake product with fake product owners, and these all thought workers that like would wear hats saying product owner on top, and they come in, and then, but they're actually our teachers as well. It was really confusing. And they come in and play like the biggest nightmare product owner or stakeholder that you've ever worked with, and yep. They'd draw that from their experience with real clients. It was really, really funny, probably with a bit of exaggeration, but really, really cool experience. And then after that came back to Brisbane to kind of start off as continue on as a grad and learn from folks by shadowing with them on clients, following them on clients, watching and working with them and learning what they do. So that was kind of the beginnings in my introduction to consulting, which is a whole nother set of skills that I never thought that I didn't know existed. Yeah. My high school self didn't know that was a thing that existed. Probably my uni self didn't know it was a thing that existed because I was too busy partying to worry about what the real world would be like. And just the kind of shift of emphasis from solving solving problems with technology for the sake of technology to solving problems because it's about people, and the solution is the technology part of the solution is really not very important. It's about like managing the people, not only the customers at the user-facing side of the product, but also all the people involved in making the product and all in the company and everything else as well. And knowing the right questions to ask and making sure that you get all of the information out, because if you miss something, you will pay dearly. So sometimes less, not as dearly as other times, depending on how stressful the client is and how stressful the project is. But it's all, anyway, I've made it sound like a really, really scary place. It's not that bad. It's really good, and it's full of good people, as you know, having worked in consulting.
It's actually really funny that you've talked about how scary it can be, because a friend quite literally this morning before we recorded, she was just mentioning in general, she's like, oh, you want to try and do something scary? Like, what do you mean? Alligator hunting or consulting? Like, essentially the same difference. It's just like, that is sad but true.
Yeah, alligator hunting. Yeah, okay.
Like managing alligators, or I mean, maybe not hunting. Did I mean? Maybe just managing them. That's not.
Managing alligators would be. Just hanging around alligators seems like at least terrifying. Um, yeah, so yes, that is a sensible comparison, I have to say.
I think it lined up pretty well for what it was. But anyway,
Yeah.
so ThoughtWorks is going pretty well. What's happening next? Where is it going? Like, did you just stay there for a while? What was kind of on the precipice of happening?
Yeah, so ThoughtWorks, amazing people. I stayed there for three and a little bit years, and over that time, there's like for those who haven't been in consulting, there's like you can do really short stints or you can do really long stints. Short stints will be like a couple of days or a week, and long stints like a couple of months. Um, so I ended up on a few quite long projects that would be from like 6 months to 9 months, which was good and bad. But the cool thing is seeing how decisions on products and projects impact kind of down the line, and in technical decisions that you make as well, which was really really um, learning so much all at once, and also learning how to learn things very quickly, as I'm sure you've probably covered in the past as well. And
it's a very like just
with your
being
story,
able to learn is just the biggest skill to have, I think. And like knowing how you learn. Oh my god, just figuring that one little piece out, and you're like, you've made it.
Yeah. Absolutely, and knowing how to Google and knowing when to actually read the documentation.
Very important. Yep.
Yeah. Instead of just trying to like look for a Stack Overflow answer and copy pasting it in. Yeah. Yeah, you know all that. So. Yeah, I would be, and very fortunate to kind of travel around to clients as well. I would be on the plane reading a book on the programming language that I was about to encounter at this client on the plane. Literally, I'm landing on the morning that I'm starting on the client, and you find after the first or second, after the first couple of languages. I don't want to sound like I'm like humble brag or anything, but after you're exposed to a few languages, they all kind of start to feel the same and
Yep.
look the same and smell the same, but learning how to like transfer the stuff that you've learned from one language to another, and not just languages but concepts and principles and kind of projects as well, like learning what you can transfer and what is different was a really really awesome skill that ThoughtWorks taught quite well, and so that was kind of one of my big takeaways from ThoughtWorks, was learning things really quickly and kind of being able to transfer things that you learn to and apply them to different situations. What I wish I had spent more time on. And the reason for this is because I got into community stuff really early on and got distracted by shiny things. Is I wish I'd spent more time getting deeper knowledge in one language and kind of one tech stack, so that I was able to solve problems in one particular stack very very comfortably before kind of having to learn a whole bunch of different ones at the same time, and like trying to learn the concepts as well as the language and the tech stack at the same time. So I started off with Java. I'd learned a little bit of it in uni, learned a bunch of it in the grad training program that ThoughtWorks ran, and then learned a lot of it on the go, but then switched like to and very very privileged and lucky to be exposed to all of these and being given the rope to kind of learn as I go. But gosh, it was freaking stressful. So I spent a lot of extra hours on weekends and nights, like just catching up and learning things before I had to go on to the client and pretend I knew what I was talking about, or at least be able to be able to fake it. so that the client didn't think that we were ridiculous. And I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but like again, the concepts transferred across. Like the language just really didn't matter, and the tech stack really didn't matter. It was the problem solving and the software engineering practices that transferred over, and then learning the syntax was something that maybe slowed us down a little bit. But yeah.
I mean, you're paying for so that. That's like, I mean, most people understand that, especially with like consulting. I think where it's like, these are people who can learn very quickly and they'll figure it out, and that's what you're paying for. Like, you're getting a solution, doesn't matter how it'll get there and who'll get it to you.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so that was kind of the summary of ThoughtWorks. So I mentioned I got into community stuff at that time. I was voluntold to do it, so I had some fantastic mentors, and I know we talk a lot about in kind of the diversity space of the importance of getting a mentor and stuff, and I never really had like a very official mentor, but all throughout ThoughtWorks there were just people around who had more experience in different things and just were so generous with their time. And so I'd hop around between different mentors. Probably every new client or every new project I've had different people to work with, which is also a really cool part of the job. And these one of my mentors was starting up Women Who Code in Queensland. She was originally from Melbourne, and I think she saw the group in Melbourne, which, funnily enough, you are running now.
Yep, this is just like the smallest world when it comes around to it, because I got involved because my mentor was the one creating the work here. It's brilliant.
Oh, it's why haven't we done this sooner? And so yeah, she was a traveling consultant from Melbourne. She was like, let's start this group in Brisbane. I need help. What are you doing? You do it with me. I was like, oh, okay, what is this? What is this idea? What is a meetup? What is a community? Like, and then I was still running it 6 years later. And finally handed it over to some amazing folks in Brisbane now. Rachel Goodenough and the team, who ran Women Who Code Melbourne with you and then moved up to Brisbane. Hi, Rach, you're amazing. So it's still going strong and fantastic meetup. So yes, that was part of the ThoughtWorks journey. I also got roped into running like ThoughtWorks community stuff, and which I loved because I loved the teaching part of it. I loved the coaching. I loved the helping people to grow, and that would have been from all from my tutoring days. I think I just really enjoyed seeing people learn stuff. And yeah, I got roped into running a few other meetups as well. So I ran CTO school for a little while. And unfortunately, because of COVID, we kind of just left it. But it was a really cool way to get kind of leadership in Brisbane to get together and talk about tech leadership. It wasn't women focused, so it was pretty skewed towards men, but that's okay. That it is what it is, and I made sure we talked about diversity a lot.
That is all. So, I think it's like it's one of those things with community stuff. I think whatever about finding a mentor, find a mentor that will voluntold. I'm trying to think of the past.
Voluntold, yeah, I think that's what.
It just sounds so weird when it's like in the present. You're like, what? Like, well, I'm told someone. That makes sense. But find someone who'll do that, like who will kind of push you out of your comfort zone, but will comfortably push you into things and support you to do that. Like, don't just throw someone off the cliff and like leave them to die in there. But actually pull you along and kind of get you going through these, because like there's no other real way to fully get into these kind of things, I think, other than like, no. It's fine. It's like the easiest thing on earth. Just show up. That's essentially all you have to do for most of them.
Pretty much.
But no one says that because it doesn't look that easy.
Maybe do a slide deck.
If you're feeling fancy that day.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because like a lot of the community stuff is very, very straightforward and very simple. And honestly, 95% of it is just showing up. And people don't see it like that because on the surface it doesn't look like that, and the amount of, I mean, honestly, I'd kind of put my whole career down to it, like as in the amount of things I've gotten to be able to do or been able to go and do is because I was somehow kind of gotten involved in the community, and it's paid off in spades. Like I've gotten to do so many cool things because of it. But yeah, God, cannot shout enough praises about it. I don't think we've talked about that in a while on the podcast, so this is great.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, oh, absolutely. Like running a group and the skills that you learn from that and kind of and I don't know if the consulting skills helped or the other way around, and just being able to like adapt and wing it when things go wrong, and just the people you meet is amazing. But I wonder if and just to throw a curveball, I wonder if anyone's asked you this, is if so people like you and me say, oh, meetups, they're amazing, like you should try and organize one if you can and stuff like that, but not everyone can organize a meetup. So I want to ask you what your thoughts are, and mine as well, because as someone who's run a bunch of meetups before, I don't have the kind of other side of it, but I think it's totally fine to not do it as well and like focus on other stuff and just attend and just enjoy. You get the same benefit with less of the work.
And I think, this is like it's a very important point, I think. And a lot of it is because I remember Mitch Stockdale. So he and I worked at Redify when I started. Like he was kind of like my mentor, or like it like started off as a buddy, but also was like the two of us were just constantly on projects together because like he was just a little bit ahead of me, and so like we kind of got thrown into a lot of things together. Oh, like fabulous work person to have, honestly. And he like was very much just like, I remember having these conversations with him. He's like, I do my job and then I finish my job at 5 o'clock. Like that's that. And if you, I mean, the other end,
you do
the
what?
I know, I'm like, what? What is this? You haven't done what? But it's so interesting because the community thing, it's great. Like it does so much for you, but it is essentially a part-time job. On the other end of things, like that is what that is. Like it is commitment. It takes time to, whether you're attending or organizing. Like either way, it's taking up time outside of work hours. And a lot, like, and his point stands true, I think, of what you do outside of those work hours shouldn't impact what your work life is or things like that. And it makes sense, right? I mean, like my 8 hours of work should stand alone for what it is, and I should be able to just be just as good as anyone else. And I agree with that, and I think it's so important that that's true. But then I also look at the other end of what the community actually provides is for people from untraditional pathways and giving them a space where they feel like they're welcome and that they can make it into the thing. And I think it's just such a there's no like right or wrong answer in this, I think, because of that part of it depends on the person. And if you don't have the space for it and you don't have the time for it, I don't think it should be held against you. And if they are holding that against you, I don't know if that's a big red flag right there. Like, oh, you don't do this? What? But yeah, it's one of those things. But also the other end of things is, and this comes up, and this is related to diversity, I think. At work, you'll see this a lot not always, but like if you're a woman, you're kind of expected to be the spokesperson for all women in tech stuff. Kind of as a just, okay, you exist and you have talked about this once, great, you'll talk about it for the rest of your life for the company. And I'm like, the onus shouldn't be on I like talking about this, I'm happy to do it, but the onus shouldn't be a mandatory thing of, oh, you've done this once, you are now in this position. Just because you've run one meetup group or you've done some work, you shouldn't be forced into kind of that pigeonhole of, no, you'll do all the other things for us too. There's so many like different nuances, I think, about this where I'm like, oh, what doesn't work, I don't know. What works for you works, and I think that's more than enough, I think, usually in these scenarios. That was such a tangent, oh my god.
Oh, no. Yeah, I could talk forever on, like, asking the person, like, it's even though it shouldn't be, it ultimately is up to the person affected to spend the energy, and it shouldn't be this way, but it ends up being this way more often than not, as a person who is affected spends the energy to educate, raise awareness, and
as
it
if
needs to
they're
change
not
soon.
Already exhausted by the constant thought and like things that go into being a person in that place in the first place.
Yeah. The great thing is all these stories are coming out now, so there's no excuse to you can just point them to these blog posts of like, here are all the things that people did wrong and how you should do them now. Just pay people. and and yes, but I don't talk about a lot of that stuff very eloquently. There are a lot of other people that do it very well, so I tend to kind of avoid being a representative of that topic. So yeah, women in tech and stuff. So yeah, it's I just can't put the words together very well, so I kind of tend to avoid it now.
Which is completely fair, and I think isn't that the thing of like, you support it and that's great, and I think the onus shouldn't be on you to constantly raise it. Okay, even if you've raised it, it shouldn't be on you to continue that conversation. Like, there should be other people having to step into that role, because it's exhausting.
Absolutely. That being said, in the women's space, I don't avoid that, but in the accessibility space,
Let's go.
That's a whole nother story. I've spent a long time putting together the material on that stuff, so I should probably be okay at talking about it.
So talking about that, actually, so ThoughtWorks is wrapped up. Is what kind of came next? Where did the accessibility stuff kind of start taking place, I guess?
Yeah, so it did start at ThoughtWorks. Sorry to rewind back to ThoughtWorks again. And they gave people the time to work on community stuff, which was really good, as long as it didn't affect your client stuff. But yeah, I think a lot of companies do that, so that's great. So if you're a company that doesn't do that, please invest in the community by giving people time to do community stuff in work hours. Thank you. So my first client at ThoughtWorks was a public website for a food company, and I won't say who, and you can probably work it out because I usually say who it is, but they got ThoughtWorks in to rebuild the public website, and one of the criteria was to make it accessible and to meet the accessibility standards called WCAG 2.0 AA. That was the name of the standard. For folks who are not familiar with, WCAG stands for, or WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and it is a set of standards, but actually are more like guidelines because they're called guidelines. I'm just talking now, and they're a set of rules to follow that will hopefully help you make your website accessible to people with disabilities, or app or game or whatnot. And these standards have been around for a very, very long time. But even though I was growing up with my dad, who was slowly developing a more and more severe disability, I wasn't aware of, firstly, the concept of accessibility as a thing until I got to this client, and then also around all the stuff around web accessibility, like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are used to kind of also as part of legislation for government websites. They have to be able to pass all these guidelines to legally kind of have their website in production and available to the public. They have to make sure they don't discriminate against people with disabilities. So, gosh, I wish I explained that better.
No,
words are not happening today.
It's all good. I think that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's to kind of link it back to something maybe folks are more familiar with. It's when you build like a shopping center or like a road or in town planning, you need a design to make sure that there are wheelchair ramps, elevators, braille signs, those dotted tiles that you see at crossings and things like that. There are a whole bunch of like written out guidelines and standards that you have to meet for buildings. It's the same thing, but for the web. There are various things that make sure that websites are accessible to folks who use different tools, different assistive technologies to access their computers and to access websites and such. So yes, that it was at the start of ThoughtWorks as well that I kind of was introduced to that topic and made the connection that, oh, it's so heavily related to my dad being able to use and access websites on the internet, and why he's been really struggling for the last few years because the web is largely not accessible. The web grew so quickly at this point. I think I don't know when kind of jQuery started to become popular, the JavaScript framework before like React and Vue and Angular and stuff. But as jQuery, for reasons I won't get into if you're not familiar with web development, just move stuff around the page and change things on the page, where assistive technologies like screen readers expect this page to kind of stay static. Like in the early days where it was just fan pages of bands and stuff, and it's like a picture and a couple of Times New Roman, like a list of songs, and like you could play the songs, and there was like textured backgrounds, and there was the cat following your pointer and stuff like that. The web was more accessible back then than it is now. And the reason for that is yeah, web development has and tech in general has evolved so quickly, and it's evolved at such a scale and such a rate that we've kind of let a few balls drop along the way, and accessibility is one of them. Probably security was one of them as well, but we picked that one back up pretty quickly because that had pretty dire consequences if you didn't do the security bit right. And the reason why I think we picked security up more quickly than accessibility is because, like, hackers are cool, and it was in pop culture. I think that's just my wild guess, but and also getting into like infosec and security became really trendy over the last decade or so, and so that whole field of software development and web development managed to kind of drop the ball, but then pick it back up. And there's lots of good tools out there and lots of good practices out there now. And I'm really hoping for the same thing to happen in web accessibility, or just digital accessibility in general, which slowly it is. Over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of awareness among like designers and developers and a lot of other groups as well. So very, very happy to see that progress. We're just got to find out a way to make it cool. It is cool, but make it cool for everyone.
I think it's definitely getting, like, I definitely have noticed an uptick specifically coming through. At least I guess it's a bit more biased towards the AI end of things, where it's become the cool thing to be able to like build something that's accessible, or like something that helps accessibility, which, I mean, yeah, it's annoying that it needs to be a cool thing to be accepted, like to be a thing, but I'm like, I'll take it. Anything at this stage, I'll take it. Because like, I mean, I definitely like pay so much more attention to it now than I ever probably did, or like even just if we're running a conference, to make sure you do kind of this is who I am, this is what I look like, to describe it to the person who might be listening, and that there might be captions, but they don't cover exactly what's happening on the screen. So it's really interesting how small these things are. Like, it takes 10 seconds out of my day to do it, but to even remember how to do, like, it's just so not commonplace, and it makes such a big difference to someone else listening. Yeah, I think it's getting there. A bit more than it did at least before I started.
yeah, for sure. And yeah, so after that client, I learned a lot. I did it so wrong, so I had to learn about it, and learning about like how to build HTML for accessibility. There's this thing called ARIA. So there's a bunch of tags you can add in HTML to make it accessible to like different technologies, like a screen reader or whatnot. And it was so inaccessible. I just put ARIA tags everywhere, and we fixed it thankfully, but it is kind of one of the first mistakes. A lot of people who have been software developers for a while learn about this thing, accessibility, and then try to implement it kind of based off the theory, and make a whole lot of mistakes. There is, and that's totally okay, and there is quite a bit of a learning curve. But keep at it, and it's amazing, and you're amazing. So, so that and I want to share that bit because I think a lot of developers kind of see the folks who are in the accessibility community and who specialize in accessibility like, we messed it up so bad at the start, and we're all at different points in our journey as well. So please don't feel like it's a scary thing. It's a little bit scary, but we're all still learning, and it's just a matter of practice and learning, and it's just really, really important. So after that, I did a deep dive and spent a lot of time learning about accessibility and accessible web development practices. And I would do brown bags or lunch and learns, or kind of just the talks at various clients and inside of ThoughtWorks as well. And that was the beginning of like this thing that I'm known for, I guess, is spreading the awareness. You can't teach accessibility in an hour session or an hour workshop, but you can certainly talk about disability, talk about all the problems that it solves, and what it looks like when something's inaccessible and how that affects people, because ultimately it is about people. So that was the start of that. And then after ThoughtWorks, I joined a bunch of product companies at various different levels. Some of them were startups, some of them were just small businesses, and I also worked as an independent contractor for some companies as well. And I found I couldn't really work anywhere full time. I think I still had the kind of consultant bug, and so I didn't stay very long at many companies. I usually stayed around a year and then kind of moved on to the next thing. And the kind of underlying stream along the way was it would always be about learning more about accessibility and sharing my knowledge of accessibility wherever I was. And I found I couldn't introduce the culture of accessibility the way that I wanted to into the companies that I worked full-time at. So I decided to go independent so that I could introduce accessibility the way that I wanted to into my own work. And the client didn't really get a say apart from deciding whether or not they wanted me to build the thing. I said, if I build the thing, you get accessibility, like it or not, and to the best of my abilities anyway. And another, as well as being kind of like a full stack developer for hire, in the last year or so, I started consulting and kind of coaching in accessibility. And I really, really enjoyed that, as well as kind of being someone that a team who understands the theory of accessibility, has learned it a bit in the past, and just wanted someone to kind of, with more experience, to kind of check their homework with. So I really, really enjoyed doing that. And also giving kind of talks and kind of an introduction to accessibility at a few places as well, has been the kind of mix that I've had going on over the last year or so, in terms of my current job status.
Oh, I love that. And I think what really jumps out is obviously accessibility has clearly been a big part of your life, from the start, right? But to kind of accidentally still somehow fall into it, are like, oh wait, no, this is it, this is the light bulb moment kind of going off, and this is exactly what's going to happen. It's so interesting, kind of how it all kind of finally found its way around, I guess, a little bit. But also, I touched on this right at the start, where I talked about you being a freelancer and wanting to talk about how you actually finally took the... Yeah. And is there a better answer than, well, they wouldn't let me do it, so I just forced it into everything I built, and I could do that because I worked for myself? So much better of an answer than than anything else that could exist out there.
Yes. I just want to go back to, I don't want to say that they wouldn't let me do it. I think I wasn't professionally ready to introduce it to that company in the way that I wanted to. So that's a little bit of, I guess, a part of my journey as well, is I want to kind of really hone my craft this time, unlike last time. and take my time before I kind of move on to like influencing at a company wide at a higher level, especially at larger size companies that I was at the time, and so yeah, that was honing my craft is a big part of it, and being kind of selective with the clients as well. And I think a lot of the questions I do get now that I am freelancing, I actually don't talk to that many people about it. A few questions that I've gotten is like, how do you find the clients? How do you manage the work? And this is, and you would know this, this is coming back to like community and knowing people and organising. If I wasn't an organizer for a group, or if I wasn't involved in tech lead ladies, I wouldn't gotten half the work that I have now. And the same with knowing people. Before I joined this community group, my mentors and peers from before have helped. Like they might advertise on LinkedIn, or they might repost someone else's advertisement on LinkedIn that they're looking for someone with a particular skill set to do a project, and or they do the introduction for me, and that has been really, really helpful. I have been really, really lucky that my flow of work has been quite steady, because lovely companies have kind of kept me going long term, which seems to be a trend in my career. Like, I just want a 3-week project, dang it. But no. And yeah, just getting those opportunities. And I know a lot of freelancers do have that kind of when it rains it pours, and when it's dries, it's completely dried up, and it's very, very stressful. Though not a great analogy to use right now because of Brisbane's flooding situation and all that, but sorry, Brisbane. But who knows what might happen in the future. But at the moment, I'm very lucky. I guess I'm kind of in a bit of a flood situation right now. I've said yes to a few too many things that I probably shouldn't have said yes to, but that's okay. Managing all of that. Yeah.
I love it. But I mean, and this is kind of, I guess this like ties a little bit back into that point of the community is kind of what you make of it and what you need from it at that point in time, right? If this is part of your livelihood, like community is just a part of your life and your job and stuff at this stage. It's completely different to, hey, I do my 9-to-5 job, I'm kicking along great at it, do I need this? Maybe you don't. This is completely fine as it is. But something I wanted to raise, because you just mentioned the community thing, was when I can't remember why or how I ended up joining one of the first few Women Who Code Brisbane's, and what you do in the Brisbane ones. And oh my god, we saw it. We do it at Melbourne now. Like, we fully stole this from you, and we're so thankful. Was when you at the start you're like, okay, this is a space. If you're looking for a job, or if you are looking to hire, off you go. Like, talk about it. Just mention it. Even if you're like, hey, I am a student who's kind of into this kind of stuff. If you see something, keep an eye out. And oh my god, it's the nicest thing we've ever done. Easily, like, it's just such a nice place to be in, to be able to be like, hey, sharing this, and people will end up catching up in comments, and like you'll see it happening on LinkedIn afterwards, and it makes me very happy. But it just links up. But thank you.
That is you're welcome. That is so good to hear. We didn't add the I'm looking for a job bit, so you would have added that yourself, and that is really cool. We should steal that back. I'll tell Rach to steal that bit back.
There you go. Which actually does remind me, we should probably wrap up for today.
Probably start to wrap up. Yeah.
But Larene, like, thank you so much for kind of jumping on, and this is exactly why, I mean, it covered so many of the topics that, hey, I'm fully into. Like, accessibility is just such an important thing, whether it's something you're already doing, or whether it's just, hey, I hadn't thought about this in a while, I'm glad I got a reminder to think about this today. So this is just, thank you for joining in.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so fun to chat about all of those things, and thank you for the wonderful work that you do to share this with everyone, and The job I'm not jealous of, which is the video editing. Thank you for taking all that time.
I'm gotten very sick of seeing my own face and listening to myself. I'm not gonna lie, it's painful. But with that, let's not extend this so I don't have to keep looking at myself again later on. We'll wrap it up there for today. Thank you so much for listening. If you've still stuck around for the whole duration, I'm very glad. Maybe look at donating and supporting the podcast, and also having a check out with Larene's work. She's doing such fabulous work with everything in the community and just accessibility in general. So I'll put all the links kind of wherever you've already found the podcast, whether that's the website or all the socials. It'll be available to go check it out. And with that, keep safe. I know there's the world war and COVID and the floods. Keep safe out there, but we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Pats Uncovered.